He was charming, clean-cut, intelligent. Ted Bundy looked like the kind of man any woman could trust. Handsome, polite, and confident. No one suspected that behind his warm smile and sharp suit hid one of the most terrifying serial killers in American history. This is the story of a man who walked among us, whose very existence shattered the illusion that monsters always look like monsters. In the early 1970s, Bundy seemed like a rising star. He studied psychology, volunteered at a crisis hotline, and worked on political campaigns. People admired him. His colleagues described him as bright and ambitious, someone destined for success. He even had a girlfriend who adored him. But behind the scenes, Ted was beginning to unravel. He harbored dark fantasies, violent, horrifying desires that festered behind his friendly eyes. Women began to vanish. It started slowly, young, attractive women disappearing without a trace across Washington state. The police had no leads, no witnesses, just a pattern. Brunette hair, parted in the middle, all college students, all gone. The only thing connecting them was a vague description, a man in a cast asking for help. Witnesses recalled seeing a good-looking man struggling to load books or carry items to his car. He seemed harmless, approachable, and that was his trick. Ted Bundy used charm as a weapon. He'd feign injury, ask for help, and lure women to his car. Once close enough, he'd strike. The kindness he showed was a mask. Beneath it lived a predator. As the body count rose, investigators began to connect the dots. A sketch emerged. A man named Ted, driving a brown Volkswagen Beetle. But there were no solid leads, and Bundy moved across states, Utah, Colorado, eventually Florida, leaving behind a trail of horror. What made him so dangerous wasn't just the brutality of his crimes, but how well he hid them. He was a law student. He debated politics. He knew how to act normal. He didn't fit the image of a killer, and that's what kept him safe for so long. Bundy's double life unraveled slowly. He was first arrested in 1975 for attempting to abduct a woman in Utah. Police found handcuffs, rope, and a crowbar in his car. But even then, many doubted his guilt. He was just too likable. It would take years, more murders, and 2 prison escapes before the world truly saw Ted Bundy for what he was. A remorseless killer who murdered at least 30 women, maybe more. The introduction to the Bundy case isn't just a tale of murder. It's a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it wears a smile. He was the man next door, the friendly face, the helpful stranger, and behind it all, he was death itself in disguise. Before the nation knew him as a monster, Ted Bundy was just a boy named Theodore Robert Cowell, born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His early life appeared ordinary on the surface, but underneath that surface, trouble was already brewing. Ted's mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was unmarried when she gave birth to him, which was considered deeply shameful at the time. To hide the scandal, she brought baby Ted to her parents' home in Philadelphia and pretended he was her younger brother. Ted grew up believing his grandparents were his parents and his mother was his sister. That lie, his first experience with deception, would set the tone for a life built on manipulation and masks. His grandfather, Samuel Cowell, was a violent, controlling man, known for sudden fits of rage and cruelty. He reportedly beat his wife and even tortured animals. Ted was exposed to this behavior as a child, and some speculate that his twisted sense of morality took root in that dark environment. While Ted later claimed he had a normal and happy childhood, many close to the family sensed something darker lingering beneath the surface. When Ted was around 4, his mother moved them to Tacoma, Washington, where she married a hospital cook named Johnny Bundy. Ted took his stepfather's last name, but the bond between them was never strong. Ted resented Johnny's modest income and lack of sophistication. He felt superior even as a boy, smarter, better looking, more deserving of success. That deep-rooted arrogance would follow him into adulthood. As a child, Ted Bundy appeared shy and introverted, but there were disturbing incidents that suggested something was deeply wrong. One relative recalled waking up to find young Ted standing silently by her bed, staring at her with a chilling expression on his face. Another time he arranged knives around a family member while she was asleep, as if experimenting with fear. But these signs went unnoticed or were dismissed. To the outside world, Ted was just a quiet boy with good manners. As he grew older, Bundy became skilled at hiding his darker impulses. He learned how to blend in, how to charm, and how to lie convincingly. He also began developing a fascination with control, dominance, and violence, interests he kept well hidden. In high school and later at the University of Washington, Ted cultivated an image of the all-American boy. He studied psychology, dressed well, and impressed professors with his intelligence. He even volunteered at a suicide prevention hotline, calmly talking people down from despair while secretly harboring fantasies of murder. Despite his humble beginnings, Ted was ambitious. He dated a wealthy, educated woman who represented the kind of life he craved: status, money, power. When she eventually broke up with him, it shattered him inside. Some believe her rejection triggered the beginning of his killing spree years later. Ted, unable to control his rage and feelings of inadequacy, would start targeting women who resembled her. Still, to everyone around him, he was a rising star. He joined politics, worked on campaigns, and made influential friends. His public image was spotless. He was the golden boy, the future lawyer, the helpful volunteer. No one suspected that the man shaking hands by day would be stalking women by night. Ted Bundy lived two lives. In one, he was charming, articulate, and admired. In the other, he was a predator who lurked in shadows, driven by bloodlust and the need for dominance. He perfected the art of deception. He wore masks so well that even people close to him never saw the truth. His girlfriend, Elizabeth Klupfer, was with him for years, completely unaware of the monster sharing her bed. He treated her daughter like family, cooked dinner, went to church. At the same time, he was disappearing into the night, committing unspeakable crimes and returning without a trace of guilt. This duality, the polished public figure and the secret killer, made Ted Bundy especially terrifying. He didn't look like a monster. He didn't act like one, and that's what made him so dangerous. His early life wasn't filled with blood or crime, but with lies, confusion, and growing darkness. He learned early how to manipulate people, how to become who they wanted him to be, and how to hide his true self behind a perfect smile. Before he ever killed, Ted Bundy was already a master of disguise. He was already dangerous. He just hadn't started yet. It began quietly. In the early months of 1974, the Pacific Northwest was a peaceful place. Students walked to class, women jogged through forest trails, and life seemed safe. But beneath that calm surface, a nightmare was taking shape, one that would change the way America looked at evil forever. Young women started disappearing, not in clusters or crowds, but one by one, vanishing without a sound. The first was Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old honor student at the University of Washington. She lived in a house near campus and worked at a radio station. On the morning of January 31st, her roommates found her bed unusually neat, but the pillow was stained with blood. Her nightgown was missing. Her bicycle remained untouched. She had simply disappeared. Over the next few months, the pattern repeated. Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, Brenda Ball. They were all young, all beautiful, all with long brown hair parted in the middle, all gone. At first, police thought the cases were unrelated. People sometimes run away. Maybe they got lost. Maybe they left voluntarily. But as the list of missing women grew longer, panic set in. Something terrible was happening, and no one knew who or what was behind it. Unbeknownst to authorities, the man responsible was Ted Bundy. He didn't fit the profile of a monster. He was clean-cut, educated, and charming. He studied psychology. He worked at a suicide crisis hotline. He smiled when he spoke. But behind that smile was something cold, calculating, and inhuman. Ted had perfected his method. He would wear a fake cast on his arm or use crutches to appear injured. Then he'd approach women, often in broad daylight, asking for help. Sometimes he dropped books. Other times he asked if they could help him load something into his car. He was soft-spoken, polite, even apologetic. He disarmed them not with weapons but with trust. Once they agreed to help him, he would lead them to his car, a tan Volkswagen Beetle. The moment they were close enough, he struck. A sudden blow with a crowbar, a shove into the car. And then he vanished into the night with his victim. Each murder was methodical, rehearsed, and personal. Bundy took trophies, items of clothing, personal belongings. He visited the sites where he left the bodies. He relived the violence. And for months, no one had a clue. That changed on July 14th, 1974. Lake Sammamish State Park was packed with people enjoying the sun when two women, Janice Ott and Denise Naslin, vanished just hours apart. Witnesses came forward saying they saw a man named Ted with his arm in a sling, asking women for help with his sailboat. They described a handsome man with a charming demeanor and, most crucially, a tan Volkswagen Beetle. It was the first real break. The media latched onto the story. The public was gripped by fear. Newspapers called him a phantom killer. Women changed their routines. Police were flooded with tips. For the first time, the killer had a face, or at least a name. And still, Ted Bundy roamed free. He blended in so well, no one suspected him. He was a law student. He was polite. He didn't look like a killer, but that was his greatest weapon. By the end of 1974, at least 8 women were dead, and many more were missing. And Ted Bundy's reign of terror had only just begun. By the fall of 1974, the name Ted Bundy had begun to haunt the Pacific Northwest. In Washington and Oregon, women were disappearing at an alarming rate, and whispers of a serial killer had taken hold. But before law enforcement could make a real breakthrough, Ted disappeared just as quietly as his victims had. What they didn't know was that Bundy hadn't stopped. He had simply moved on. In September 1974, Ted Bundy relocated to Salt Lake City, Utah, to enroll in law school. He presented himself as a focused, ambitious student, making new friends and settling into a new life. But the darkness followed him. Within weeks, women began to vanish again, this time hundreds of miles from where it all began. The first to disappear in Utah was Nancy Wilcox, a 16-year-old girl last seen walking near her home in Holiday. Then Melissa Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of a local police chief, vanished. Her body was later found, showing signs of brutal assault. Soon after, 17-year-old Laura Amy went missing. Her body, too, was discovered weeks later. A chilling pattern was emerging again. Ted's method hadn't changed. He still used charm, manipulation, and trust to lure his victims. He'd pretend to be injured or impersonate an authority figure. His victims were usually young, white, with long brown hair parted in the middle. He would gain their trust, lead them to his car, often the familiar tan Volkswagen Beetle, and then strike. He killed with terrifying precision, often bludgeoning his victims unconscious before abducting them. The bodies were left in remote areas, often in wooded or mountainous terrain. Some were never found at all. By early 1975, Bundy expanded his killing spree to Colorado. Corinne Campbell, a 23-year-old nurse, vanished from a hotel hallway in Aspen while vacationing with her fiancé. Weeks later, her body was discovered in a snowbank off a remote highway. Her head had been crushed. Law enforcement across Utah, Colorado, and Idaho began to see the connections. Women were disappearing in similar ways. Witnesses described a polite man, sometimes wearing a sling or cast. The tan beetle came up again. But despite these similarities, police departments in different states weren't effectively communicating. Bundy used this to his advantage, staying one step ahead by crossing state lines and changing his appearance just enough to stay hidden. He became a ghost. Bundy didn't always kill immediately. Some victims were kept alive for hours or even days. He returned to the bodies to perform unspeakable acts, a level of depravity that shocked investigators when the truth finally emerged. He collected trophies, hair, clothing, sometimes even body parts. These were not just murders, they were rituals. As the body count rose, so did public fear. Women across the region were terrified to go out alone. Police were overwhelmed. Newspapers ran daily updates, and the mysterious man named Ted became a subject of national fear. But with no firm evidence, and with Bundy blending so perfectly into society, he remained a shadow, unseen, untouchable. By mid-1975, Bundy had murdered dozens of women across at least 5 states, and yet he still walked free. He returned to class, smiled at friends, dated women, and studied law as if nothing was wrong. Behind that carefully controlled mask, however, the monster was always watching, always planning. The cross-state killing spree wasn't just an expansion of violence, it was a demonstration of how easily Ted Bundy manipulated people, law enforcement, and an entire country. He didn't just fool others, he thrived in it. And as the deaths mounted, so did one terrifying truth. Ted Bundy wasn't slowing down. He was just getting started. By 1975, the noose was tightening around Ted Bundy. After years of murders across multiple states, law enforcement finally caught a break. In August of that year, Bundy was pulled over by police in Utah. Inside his car, they found suspicious items: a ski mask, rope, handcuffs, and a crowbar. Tools that matched descriptions given by surviving victims. He was arrested on suspicion of attempted kidnapping. Soon, evidence linked him to multiple disappearances in Utah and Colorado. Bundy denied everything, maintaining his innocence with calm confidence. He even chose to represent himself in court, relying on his charm and legal knowledge to manipulate the system. Judges and journalists were amazed by how composed and intelligent he seemed. But beneath that polished exterior, he was plotting something far more daring. In June 1977, Bundy was extradited to Colorado to face murder charges. During a pretrial hearing at the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen, Bundy was left alone in the law library, uncuffed. Taking his chance, he jumped from a second-story window and ran into the mountains. The nation was stunned. He was on the run for 6 days before being recaptured. But Bundy wasn't done yet. In December of the same year, while awaiting trial in a Colorado jail, he lost weight and secretly sawed a hole in the ceiling of his cell. On New Year's Eve, he escaped again, this time disappearing completely. Authorities didn't know where he went, and for weeks there was no trace. What they didn't know was that Bundy had boarded a bus, traveled across the country, and ended up in Florida. There in January 1978, Bundy struck again, this time more violently than ever. In the early morning hours, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. Within minutes, he bludgeoned and strangled 2 women to death and severely injured 2 others. Just weeks later, he abducted and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, his youngest known victim. Ted Bundy had escaped justice, twice, and returned to killing with even more brutality. His arrest in Florida would finally bring his spree to an end. But the damage was done. The charming law student who once smiled in courtrooms had become a symbol of how evil can wear a mask, and how it can slip through the cracks again and again. After escaping from jail in Colorado, Ted Bundy vanished without a trace. For weeks, authorities had no idea where he had gone. What they didn't know was that Bundy had traveled over 1,000 miles to Florida under an alias, living in a stolen rooming house and blending in as easily as he always had. But this time, the monster was growing more reckless and far more violent. On January 15, 1978, just weeks after arriving in Tallahassee, Bundy unleashed one of his most savage attacks. In the early morning hours, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. It was just after 3 a.m. when Bundy slipped through an unlocked door. The house was quiet, the women asleep. Within 15 minutes, Bundy brutally assaulted 4 women in their bedrooms. Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy were murdered. Margaret was beaten with a piece of firewood, and Lisa was strangled, bludgeoned, and sexually assaulted. 2 other women, Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, were severely injured but survived. Bundy fled the scene before anyone even realized what had happened. Just a few blocks away, less than an hour later, he attempted to attack another woman, Cheryl Thomas, in her apartment. She too survived, but was left with permanent hearing damage and a broken jaw. The ferocity and speed of these attacks shocked investigators. This wasn't the careful, methodical Bundy they had chased for years. This was a man unraveling, consumed by rage and losing control. But the horror wasn't over. On February 9, 1978, Bundy abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her middle school in Lake City, Florida. It was broad daylight. She was last seen walking between buildings on campus, never to return. Her body was found nearly 2 months later in a remote pig shed, miles away. She had been raped and murdered. Kimberly's murder struck a nerve across the country. This wasn't a college student or a woman walking alone at night. This was a child. The nation was sickened. The media coverage exploded. Public fury reached a boiling point. Bundy's image as a charming killer was gone. Now he was simply a monster. Within days of Kimberly's disappearance, Bundy was pulled over by police in Pensacola for driving a stolen car. He fought the officer, but it was over. This time, there would be no escape. Bundy was arrested and finally identified. Fingerprints linked him to the Chi Omega crime scene. Bite marks on Lisa Levy's body matched his teeth. The evidence was overwhelming. When the full story broke, his escape, his trail of victims, his attack on a child, the public's shock turned to rage. Bundy, who had once represented himself in court with a confident smile, now faced a justice system that had run out of patience. People demanded accountability. They wanted answers. And above all, they wanted him gone. The Florida attacks marked the end of Ted Bundy's freedom and the final chapter of his bloody reign. But for the families of the victims in a terrified nation, the scars he left would never truly fade. By 1979, the world knew his name. Ted Bundy, once a law student with a bright future, was now one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. After his final rampage in Florida and the brutal murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, Bundy was finally behind bars. But his trial would be unlike anything the country had ever seen. Dubbed the trial of the century, Bundy's court case was the first to be nationally televised in the United States. The courtroom in Miami was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and a growing audience watching at home. But the man on trial wasn't just a murderer, he was also the star of the show. Ted Bundy represented himself in court. Dressed in a suit, calm and articulate, he questioned witnesses, challenged prosecutors, and put on a performance that often felt more like a theater production than a murder trial. Cameras captured every smirk, every confident step, every chilling look. Some viewers were fascinated, others were horrified. Then came one of the most bizarre moments in courtroom history. During the penalty phase of the trial, while acting as his own attorney, Bundy called Carol Ann Boone, a woman who had remained loyal to him throughout his arrests, to the witness stand. As part of his questioning, he asked her to marry him, and when she said yes, Bundy declared that they were legally married under Florida law right then and there, in front of a stunned courtroom. But not even Bundy's charm or theatrics could hide the truth. The evidence was damning. Graphic crime scene photos were shown to the jury, images of Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, the young women murdered at the Chi Omega sorority house. Forensic experts revealed bite marks on Lisa Levy's body that matched Bundy's dental impressions perfectly. Survivors took the stand, recalling in chilling detail how Bundy had attacked them. Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler, who survived the Chi Omega attack, spoke about the horror of waking up to violence in the darkness. Another woman who escaped from a prior abduction attempt described his manipulation and cold control. The jury didn't take long. Ted Bundy was convicted of the Chi Omega murders and sentenced to death by electric chair. Later, he would also receive his second death sentence for the murder of Kimberly Leach. As the verdict was read, Bundy's mask of confidence slipped, just for a moment. But the cameras caught everything. The man who had fooled so many for so long was finally cornered by justice. The trial of Ted Bundy wasn't just about crime. It was about evil in plain sight. And this time, it would not walk free. Behind Ted Bundy's charming smile and articulate words was something far more terrifying than any mask. An empty, remorseless mind capable of unspeakable horror. To the world, he was a mystery, a handsome, educated man who could talk politics, make people laugh, and quote law books with ease. But beneath that surface lived a cold, calculating killer. Psychologists who studied Bundy often use the same words: sociopath, narcissist, manipulator. He lacked empathy, had no sense of guilt, and viewed others, especially women, as objects to control or destroy. He wasn't driven by rage alone. He was fueled by a hunger for power and domination. His killings weren't just violent, they were rituals that gave him a twisted sense of control over life and death. He could lie without flinching, manipulate without hesitation, and mimic normal human emotions flawlessly. That's what made him so dangerous. Bundy didn't look like a monster. He didn't act like a lunatic. He was a predator in plain sight. After his conviction and death sentences, Bundy was sent to death row in Florida's Rayford prison. For nearly a decade, he sat behind bars, appealing his sentences, talking to lawyers, giving interviews. And during that time, the world got a deeper look into the mind of this killer. He granted several interviews to journalists and psychologists, often speaking about himself in the third person or, hypothetically, never fully admitting guilt, always dancing around the truth. But slowly, as his execution date approached, the mask began to crack. In 1989, with the electric chair looming, Bundy began to confess. He admitted to killing over 30 women, though investigators believe the true number is likely much higher. He described his methods in chilling detail, how he lured victims, how he gained their trust, how he killed them, and even how he returned to their bodies to relive the crimes. He confessed to decapitating some victims, keeping their heads as trophies. He described sexual acts performed on the corpses, acts so disturbing that even hardened detectives were left shaken. But Bundy never showed true remorse. His voice remained calm, detached. He tried to blame pornography and childhood trauma. He portrayed himself as a victim of a broken society. But behind his words there was no sorrow, only calculation. Experts saw through him. His interviews were not out of guilt, but strategy. Bundy believed that by cooperating, by giving information, he could delay his execution. He thought he could manipulate the system one last time, but it was too late. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Outside the prison, a crowd of hundreds gathered, holding signs that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn." People cheered as the lights inside the prison flickered, a sign that the execution was underway. In death, as in life, Bundy remained a figure of chilling fascination. But what he left behind was not just a body count. He left behind a legacy of fear, a case that redefined how America viewed serial killers, and a psychological blueprint of what true evil can look like. Ted Bundy wasn't a monster in the shadows. He was a monster hiding in plain sight, a manipulator, a narcissist, a man who used charm like a weapon. And though he's gone, his story continues to haunt the world as a warning. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters wear the most human faces. In his final hours, Bundy spoke quietly. He had spent the previous night meeting with ministers, reflecting, or perhaps pretending to. He declined a special last meal, settling for a simple breakfast of eggs, toast, and coffee. In his final statement, Bundy looked at his attorney, his spiritual advisor, and a prison official, and said, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." Those were his last words. He showed no remorse for his crimes, no apologies, no confessions beyond what he had already revealed in hopes of delaying his death. Even in his final moments, Bundy remained Bundy, calm, manipulative, and cold. The public reaction was intense. News of his execution spread rapidly. Television stations across the country broadcasted scenes of the cheering crowd outside the prison. Survivors, victims' families, and millions of Americans felt a deep sense of relief. Justice had finally caught up to the killer who had once outsmarted everyone. But Bundy's story didn't die with him. In the years that followed, Ted Bundy became the subject of countless books, documentaries, films, and psychological studies. His case redefined how America viewed serial killers, not as deranged outsiders, but as people who could hide in plain sight. He wasn't a madman foaming at the mouth. He was intelligent, polite, well-spoken, and deadly. His legacy also changed law enforcement. The Bundy case helped push for better interstate communication, improved investigation techniques, and the development of criminal profiling. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit studied Bundy to understand how killers think and operate, insights that would later help catch other serial murderers. But above all, Ted Bundy left behind a chilling lesson. Evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it holds the door open. Sometimes it wears a suit and talks about law school. His execution may have ended his life, but his story continues to echo in courtrooms, classrooms, and documentaries, reminding the world of how one man with charm and cunning turned himself into a nightmare that will never be forgotten.